All right, we're back. Last you saw, I sprayed the designs on the panel for our first panel, and I wanted to do something in the middle since I kind of set it up that way so you can put something in the middle. Now on your first panel, you're going to be doing everything by hand. So if you want to do a logo, an initial or whatever, your name, you have to hand cut it with a razor blade or an X-Acto knife. Okay, so and we'll get to the computer cutting stuff on the second one. So, but in case you don't have computers, you got to cut it by hand. You need to learn how to do that, right? So we've kind of developed a thing at school that seems to work pretty well. So I decided just on my last name initial, which is a B, Old English, which seems to be pretty popular in class. Little intricate, so I picked kind of a simpler one. I didn't want to do too much fine cutting on my first one. So what I've done is I found it on the computer and I enlarged it and copied it off until I got the right size, and I was going for about a 5x7, and I came pretty close on that. So I just printed out a couple of them to get the right size, and this will be what I trace onto a template or a stencil to put on our panel. Okay, so what we have is the letter that I printed off on the printer. Okay. I got a little bit of carbon paper, which is black on one side, and you want to have the black side down. The lighter side is on the top. This way, whenever you make a mark, right, it'll transfer it onto whatever you're trying to mark it on. Okay, so we got our letter, we got a carbon paper, and the carbon paper can be used over and over again. They last for quite a while as long as they don't get torn. You're not using that much of the carbon. The last thing we have is a bit of the stencil paper that we use on the computer cutters, right? So this is just a like sticker material, but not as sticky. So we'll do this. If you don't have this though, what would you do if you didn't have like a stencil material? You can just use tape. So a lot of times in class, when we run out of stencil material, I just have the students, and this is just a piece of plastic that I'm going to be cutting on so I don't cut into my workbench. So if we run out of stencil material, I have students just line up some 1.5" tape on their panel, right? So this basically becomes your stencil paper, right? And then you can lay your carbon paper on top. Make sure you got the right side. Boom. And then whenever you trace around your letter, it'll get transferred onto the tape, and then you cut the tape. Okay, so works basically the same. We're lucky enough to have some stencil material, so we won't use the tape, but you can. Okay, so stencil material, carbon paper, darkest side down, and you can kind of look at it, you can see which one's darkest. And then our letter. And I want to make sure that my letter is on top of the stencil paper, so I'm not off the side or anything. I don't want to be too close to the edges. Let me shift it over a little bit. Make sure you got room. Now what I'm going to do is tape it all down so it doesn't move around. So just take a little bit of tape. Ideally, I would probably cut that carbon paper down so that I can tape all three, the stencil, the carbon, and the print all together so they don't shift, but we should be all right. All right, so once you got it taped down, you don't want to start moving it around. You want it to stay where it's at. Otherwise, you got to have trouble lining up your lines again. All right, so now at this point, I'm just going to take a pen or a pencil, and I'm just going to start outlining it, okay? Press hard enough to make the carbon transfer. But basically just start drawing. And of course, the cleaner you draw, the better your stencil is going to be when we go to cut it out. And you'll see like a lot of tattoo artists doing stuff like this over a light box. They'll transfer it onto some transfer paper that transfers onto skin after they draw their artwork. So very similar. And if you make mistakes, it's not a big deal. Remember, we haven't cut yet, so any mistakes can be fixed. Try to work my way around it here. and still have you be able to see it. I'm at kind of a weird angle, so you can see I kind of messed up there, but we can always fix that before we cut. So what I can do is just come back and draw another line, and just remember that that's the one I want to cut. As you go through, just make sure you didn't miss anything. It's kind of tough when you peel up your tracing paper and everything and find out you missed a section. So it's good to use a pen or a pencil so you can see where you've been. Alright, so I just want to look it over. It looks like I got everything. You can come back and fix anything you want to fix. Alright, looks decent. Alright, so let's peel that up. And if you're real careful, you wanted to check something, you can always just half of it, kind of hold it down and make sure that it transferred. If it looks alright, then we can unmask the whole thing. Okay, so our printed page, our carbon paper, which can still be used, don't throw it away, and there's our letter right there. Alright, so this is ready to start cutting. I'm going to be using a razor blade, so I'll get a new razor blade. Don't try to cut this with a used razor blade you find around. Get a new one. They don't last that long. Now what I want to do, I'm going to try, this is 2 layers, so it's the sticker part, and then it's got a backing just like a sticker would have that you peel to stick. So what I want to try to do is not cut through both. I want to try to just cut through the top layer, because we're going to end up putting a transfer tape on top of this so we can put it on the panel, and I don't need it to be cut all the way through. So I'll start cutting, and this will be the tough part. I mean, as far as getting it straight and everything. If you have a lot of straight lines, you can always use a straight edge to cut with to keep them straight, but let's just start, see where we end up here. Right. Now when I peel out, I'm going to take parts of this out, so some will stay and some will come out. So whatever is going to be painted is going to be peeled out. So obviously all the letter part will get peeled out. These parts that are the background will stay in there so that it covers the background we already have on the panel. Alright, so I might start peeling some stuff as I cut, but just so you know, that's what it is. I find it's easier to cut and move what I'm cutting rather than my body. That way I can stay in one spot and I can just kind of spin what I'm cutting, and the cuts actually come out a bit better, a little cleaner. This has a lot of curves in it. Curves are a little tough, but we'll make it. Kind of look around to make sure I got everything. So what I want to do just to kind of check where I'm at. So like I said, these are going to be peeled out. This is where the paint is going to go. So if I cut everything right, there'll be some little corners that don't want to come up. That's normal. All right, there we go. So ready to go. All right, so it came up pretty decent. At this point, if you see any little edges or something that needs to be cleaned up, now would be the time to do it before it gets on the panel. So if there's any little jagged edges that you want to smooth out, now would be the time with the razor blade just to clean it up a little bit. I'm all right with it. So it looks pretty decent. All right, looks decent. So there's our Old English B. Now what I want to do, all right, so now if I was just to take this, peel it off of its backing and stick it on the panel, as soon as I peel it up, not everything's going to come up because they're all detached, right? So I want to keep everything together in one piece while I transfer it onto my panel, okay, without fear of it coming undone or missing pieces. So what we use is a clear transfer paper or transfer tape. It's real similar to what we just cut. Just big enough to cover it. You don't need a bunch of extra. Right, we don't need to be wasteful. And we could just use a razor blade to trim that. All right. And now what I want to do is just make sure it's stuck to the transfer, or stuck to the stencil paper. So you can use a squeegee, like a Bondo spreader squeegee or whatever, right? A pen. Just something to get it stuck down together. So when we go to peel it, it comes off with the transfer tape. Okay, so at this point we're ready to put it onto our panel. So this is how we do the old school hand cut. The only difference is if we use tape, it would typically already be on the panel, so we wouldn't have to use the transfer, the tape. But came out pretty decent. I'm happy with it. So we'll go put that on the panel, and we'll shoot that black, and then we'll be ready for some candy. All right. All right, so we're back here at school. You can see the panel we've got from when we did all the patterns. Now what I want to do is take the B that we've cut out and place it on there where I want it, mask off the rest, and shoot the B black. All right, so last we saw I cut this out of the stencil material. It's still got a backing on there that we got to peel, and it's got the clear transfer tape that we want to keep on to keep everything together while we put it on the panel. Now nothing's touched this really since I've left, so I don't need to clean it. If anything, maybe a little bit of a wet paper towel. Don't use any solvents at this point. It will probably soften up your paint. So what I want to do first is just kind of look at it to see where the placement would be, kind of center it in there. You don't want it to be overlapping onto your edges. Fairly centered, whatever looks pleasing to the eye, okay? And then what we're going to do is slowly peel this off. So I want to separate it, making sure everything comes off of the backing. And if we squeegeed it good, everything should stay. So far, so good. All right, so everything came off of the backing, and you can see we didn't cut through. There's a couple small parts where we cut a little deep, but it held together pretty well. Now what I want to do is take this, and sometimes it takes two people to kind of center it where you want it. One on each end. Let's see. See how it's a little floppy. So I'm just looking at the spacing around the edges, making sure it looks fairly straight. Moved it a little. Looks decent. All right. Now I just want to kind of work from the middle out to work any air bubbles out. Pushing down light at first. Make sure everything's where I want it. Okay. Press it down. Let me grab a spreader so we can squeegee that a little bit. So I'm just using a Bondo spreader just to make sure we get good adhesion to the panel, because we still have to peel off the clear and I don't want it to come up. So stick it down there good. If your surface is not completely smooth, it does have trouble sticking, so you want to make sure it's as smooth as possible. You'll be all right. Sometimes we have to use a heat gun to get everything to stick down. Let's see how we do with this. Carefully, and you can see as I'm peeling this, I'm peeling it back over itself. I'm not pulling straight up, because if I pull straight up, my stencil is going to come off. So you can see it wants to come up a little bit. Just have to be careful there. I found one of the problems is the transfer tape is a little bit stickier than the stencil paper, so it's aggressive. And this doesn't need to stay on there for long. As long as you're ready to spray, we can get it on there, get it masked off, and within 10 minutes or so, should be ready to spray. So we only need it to stick down there for a short amount of time. If you're leaving it overnight, it might try to peel up on you. So you want to make sure you're ready to go once you get this down. And in some cases, we'll use a different vinyl that sticks a little bit better. I do have troubles with it sometimes, wanting to leave behind some adhesive when we peel it, so just depends on the situation. You can see it's sticking down all right. Once we get past the edges, it does okay. Now what I'm looking for is there's going to be air bubbles and stuff all around it, which is fine. The main thing is I'm looking for is just the edges, right? As long as the edges are down, that's all we really need to worry about at this point. So I'm just going to come around, make sure they're pushed down. All right. And we'll check it again right before we spray it, but that'll make sure we've got that down. Now I'm going to paper it. So same thing as we did before with the designs. Isolate it. Okay, so we don't want spray on our patterns that we've already done. All right, so we isolate it. Everything's taped down. I'm going to tuck this under. Keep it from blowing around. Ready to spray. I'm just going to check the edges one more time after I get my gun set up, and we're going to shoot maybe 2 coats of black on there, and that'll be good. All right. All right, so I'm still using the touch-up gun, same as we did all the designs with, same black paint. My needle or my gun setup will be somewhere in between the smallest and what we did for the lace. So I'm checking my air. I want to open up my fan a bit. So the top knob, I'm turning it counterclockwise to open a little bit. My material, I'm going to cut back just a little bit so it doesn't go on too heavy. This should be all right. Now what I want to do is just go around and double check my edges. And this will be the time, if they don't stick down, grab a heat gun real quick to get them to stick down, if only for a few minutes. All right, we look pretty good. All right, so this should only take a couple coats. Turn up my air just a little bit. And again, don't put her too heavy. So you see, I'm not trying to cover it in one coat. Build it up slowly. So I'm blowing it dry. It is still in the 90s today, so it's warm. But basically, once you see it go dull, once it flashes off, you can put on your next coat. But you do want to be careful. If you try to go too heavy on your base coats, you're going to end up wrinkling the paint underneath, and then you have to start over. All right. I'll do one more coat since they're light coats. I can still see a little bit through it, so we'll let that. I'll blow it dry since it's warm out. Typically, you let it sit for a few minutes. And again, with custom painting, you want to try to put the least amount of coats on to get the desired effect. We don't want to get it too heavy, right? We don't want too much buildup. I think we're looking pretty good. So we'll let that dry for a couple minutes, and then we'll unmask it and see how it looks. All right, let's unmask this carefully. Now carefully grab a corner here. Okay, so far so good. For the inner ones, I usually take a razor blade just so I can kind of catch an edge of that. And there is a risk of scratching the paint. We can always come back and touch it up if we needed to. Not a huge deal. And you want to make sure you don't scratch your paint underneath the lace or anything. You don't want to scratch that while you're peeling these also. You want to be careful. You gotta be careful. All right. Pretty happy with that. See it from there. Looks decent. All right. Now the next thing I want to do is going to go in the booth, and we're going to shoot a candy on that. All right. So that you'll have different shades of the candy. So I think I'm going to do a candy apple red on this. So what'll happen is the black will turn a real dark red, the silver will be a brighter red, and then the gray lace will be somewhere in between. And then once we unmask all the tape lines, those will be the brightest silver, right? So it'll have silver and 3 different shades of red on this. So it should look pretty good out in the sun, all right? So before I candy it, I want to go around and double check all my masking to make sure nothing is peeled up. All right. Once it's good, I'm going to go ahead and candy it. All right. So you'll see it in the booth getting candied next.